I'm Monica Bueller, Director of Acel Conceptions.
And I'm Peyton White. I'm one of our surrogate coordinators.
And today we're going to be chatting about some of the questions that Peyton gets when surrogates are newly applying, when they're learning about the surrogacy process, like kind of as newbies.
A lot during the process, there's a lot of questions, and they're all great ones. I think some of the biggest ones that we get are going to be, can I be a surrogate without having tubes or having my tubes tied?
So this comes up quite often, actually. So typically the hot topic is like, well, am I genetically linked to the baby, or am I using my eggs? As a surrogate, you're not genetically linked. So years ago, like 15, 20 years ago, there used to be called what was traditional surrogacy, where you as the surrogate would use your eggs, and so you were biologically the mother. So that's not as common anymore. And so as a gestational surrogate, there's either an egg donor used or the intended mother's eggs are used. So you're not genetically linked to the baby. And so you are just the carrier, like the cooker. And so that comes up quite often, right? I mean, what do you think you get that question? Once a day?
Probably once a day, a few times a week for sure. I think another question that girls are always seeming to wonder is, why do their partners have to be involved in the process when they're the ones carrying the baby?
Yeah, so this is a big one. So husbands always, or the partners or boyfriends, always kind of know, like, how much do they have to be involved. So from a psychological point of view, they need to know that their partner, we need to know, and the intended parents need to know that the partner's on board, right? That they're going to be supportive to the surrogate. From a legal standpoint, they need to be a part of the legal contract. And then from a medical standpoint, because of sexual activity, they need to have an STD screen because there's exposure to the baby. So that's the involvement. So typically we explain it as that they have to be a psychologically screened, an STD screen, and then sign the contract, and they'll obviously be supportive during the pregnancy.
Yep, so that means your partners do have to be involved. And I would say our biggest last question can be injections. It always seems to be a hot topic with girls because they're a little bit nervous. Tell me about injections, the process.
Yeah, so this one's always the big one because it's a pretty lengthy time that you have to do injections or be on IVF medications. So typically like a cocktail of medications, and that can vary from IVF clinic to IVF clinic. So it can be a combination of oral medications, patches, vaginal suppositories, and then always the doozy is the injections. So if you haven't ever given yourself injections, which is typically not the majority of people, so this is kind of usually like the make or break. So everybody gets through it. It's obviously not amazing, like hooray, but it's always that first one that gives you kind of the
jitters.
Yeah, but you get through it. Everybody does. Girls come back to surrogacy multiple times, so obviously it's kind of like childbirth. You forget about it, and then you're like, oh yeah, that wasn't too bad. But yeah, so you're taught by the nurses at the clinic. We have tricks and tips to get you through it. So yes, it's not horrible, but yes, you get a little bit of lumps and bruising, of course, because they're injections, and it's a fairly lengthy time. It is about 12 weeks of injections. But yes, it is one of those questions. Some typical side effects, that's a lot of other questions that come up. It's very similar to like what you would get with your PMS symptoms. So like breast tenderness, maybe a little bloaty, maybe a little bit more weepy, maybe a little bit more sassy or grumpy would be typical. Oh, and headaches is another one too that you would get. Thanks so much, Peyton, for bringing up some of the questions that you get on a daily, weekly basis. So if you guys are interested in being a surrogate, reach out to Peyton. You can get in touch with us on our socials, or you can apply on our website. Peyton?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing from you guys.
Thank you so much.